Imagine chess as a grand theater where two warriors clash on a battlefield of 64 squares, each move a calculated strike or clever feint. Today, we are diving into the legendary 1971 Berkeley encounter between American Grandmaster Walter S. Browne, wielding the white pieces like a bold explorer charting new territories, and Jude Acers, the black-clad defender, a cunning strategist who turns chaos into triumph. This game isn't just a sequence of moves. It's a symphony of sacrifice, surprise, and sheer brilliance, often hailed as one of chess's hidden gems for Acers' audacious play that snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. What makes it special? In an era of classical chess, Acers unleashed a whirlwind of tactics that left audiences breathless, proving that even under pressure, genius can rewrite the script. White opens with e4, the classic invitation to fight in the center. It is a sentence that says, "I want space, I want clarity." For beginners, e4 is direct. It immediately contests the center and frees to pieces. Acers answers symmetrically, mirroring the intention. When you meet a direct challenge with a direct reply, you keep lines open and the game honest. e5 is also a way to say you are prepared to meet the battle head-on rather than avoid it. White develops a knight, attacks the e5 pawn, and prepares rapid castling. It is efficient, principled play. Piece out, king, safe. Black plays the Petrov, sometimes called the Russian defense. By meeting nf3 with nf6, black invites symmetrical tension. It is a subtle, solid path. This move aims to challenge the center of white not by immediate pawn pushes, but by piece play and trade. Black could have played nc6, which is the classical path, but nf6 aims at equality, sometimes leading to quieter positions or sharp tactical lines depending on what white chooses. White pushes in the center. This is the aggressive response. Open the lines, test the knight on f6, and aim to seize space. The idea is thematic. Leverage the central pawns in open files for bishops and queen. Black accepts the temporary imbalance and grabs the e4 pawn. This is the classical Petrov idea. If white overextends, black will snap material, then strive to equalize through exchanges. Black willingly gives up central harmony for concrete counterplay. White develops bishop and aims at the knight on e4. It comes to a natural square, supporting a future pawn push or recapture. The choice of bd3 instead of moves like nxe5 is instructive. Black's knight on e4 is temporarily advanced but also a target. This is the sort of position where small inaccuracies can be punished quickly. Black strikes back in the center. d5 is energetic. If white is allowed to settle, white's center would grow too strong. Black wants to trade, simplify, and use the central pawn to justify the knight on e4. nc6 could have been calmer, but d5 is combative and suits the mood of both players. White sacrifices the knight to grab material and to break open black's center. It is a tactical, aggressive choice. By playing nxe5, white says, "Let us open the board and test your coordination." Black retreats the bishop to d6, counter-attacking and keeping the wound from widening. This move supports the e5 square and sets up future exchanges. Alternatives for black might have been be7, but bd6 is sharper, keeping active pressure on white's center and controlling key squares. White castles. Simple, quick. The king moves to safety and rook is connected. Often in tactical fights, speeding king's safety is a small but decisive practical choice. Black mirrors with his own castling. Now both kings are tucked behind pawns. The battle will be fought in front of them, with both sides castled. The game is set for a middle game offensive. White pushes c4, attempting to unbalance the center and open lines. It is thematic, pressure the d5 pawn. Potentially trade down and activate the long diagonal for the bishop. This is a throwing of the glove challenge. The black bishop from d6 captures the knight on e5. That returns material balance in a concrete way and keeps black's central influence alive. Black could have taken with a pawn or considered exchanges on d5. But the bishop capture is active and keeps bishops on the board. White recaptures with the pawn, opening the d-file and leaving a passed pawn and e5. The pawn and e5 becomes a spearhead. It occupies a strong outpost that will both restrain black and be a target. Black develops a knight to c6, attacking the d4 c5 complex and increasing pressure. It also readies jumps to b4 or a5. The knight is a perfect instrument for counterplay now that the center is clarified. White captures on d5. Widening the center and aiming to remove black's pawn, this is logical. Eliminate central defenders and potentially free the bishop's diagonal. Black plays qxt5, recapturing with the queen and centralizing it on d5. It is the queen who now commands the center of the board. With queen centralized, tactics become highly likely. White brings the queen to c2. This is modest but practical. It eyes f4 and b2 and keeps the queen off pins in check. Also, it indirectly defends some central squares and prepares the possible nc3 to pressure d5. Black jumps the knight to b4. Which knight? The knight from c6 hops to b4 and aims at c2. This is a provocative move. It threatens forks and senses tactical annoyances against white queen and pawns. The knight on b4 is like a prowling fox near the henhouse, ready to snatch a loose piece. Alternatives for black could have been to bring another piece into play or to retreat the queen. But nb4 is bold and tactically motivated. White plays bxc4, taking the knight on e4. This is the natural reclaiming move. Eliminate the outpost and simplify. White recovers material by trading pieces and removing black's centralized knight. This capture also opens the diagonal and creates new tensions. After this, the balance of forces will change rapidly. Black responds with nxc2. This is a dramatic moment. Black sacrifices or trades knights to snatch the queen. In effect, black says the value of activity and outposts outweighs ordinary material counts. The knight on c2 not only takes material but also threatens more havoc for a beginner. Capturing a queen with a knight like this is a tactical blow and shows how piece activity can pay off spectacularly. An alternative for white would have been to interpose or allow different trades earlier. But once the queen is on c2 and the knight on b4 can hop to c2, the threat was real. White replies by capturing the enemy queen on d5 with a bishop. It is a fierce exchange. Queens are off and both sides now have imbalance in material and piece activity. White gives up a queen but trades to regain material balance because white had lost the queen. Capturing black's queen restores some parity. This is the sort of sequence that punishes inaccuracy and rewards foresight. Idea of white is to remove black's centralized queen while leaving his own pieces active. Black plays bf5, developing the bishop from c8 to f5 and attacking. The bishop comes to life, placing pressure on the center and pointing at potential weak squares. Black's pieces begin to coordinate, the knight on c2, bishop on f5, and rooks soon to enter the stage. White plays g4, an aggressive pawn thrust. This is an attempt to push black's dark squared bishop away and to seize space on the king's side. It is an emotional move. White is trying to generate counterplay and disrupt black's coordination. Black retreats the bishop to g6, safe square, still eyeing the board. The bishop keeps diagonal influence and waits for the moment to strike again. Retreating is sensible. Chasing after the pawn would be clumsy here. White pushes pawn with f4, a companion to g4. White pawns are rolling forward like surf toward the enemy shore. The idea is to gain more space and open lines for rooks and bishops. It also aims to restrict black's bishop. Black responds not by retreating further, but by placing the bishop on d3. This is precise. The bishop now plants itself deep in white camp, on a strong outpost, on d3. It eyes multiple targets and can be a thorn in white position. This is the kind of counterintuitive move that high-level players prize instead of fleeing. You plan and create problems for your opponent. White brings a rook to d1, contesting the file and preparing to challenge black's invasion. Perhaps white hopes to chase the bishop or to prepare tactical returns. Black plays ba6. On e6, the bishop eyes long diagonal and indirectly pressures white queenside. It is a repositioning that keeps black's pieces coordinated. It also hints at tactical threats against a1 and c2 squares. White develops a knight to c3, trying to bring more defenders into the game and attack the c2 outpost. It is necessary development while white counts the cost of the earlier complications. Black answers with nxa1. This is a spectacular material grab, a whole rook for a knight. It shows the power of deep outposts and tactical sequence. Black is daring to keep a knight far inside white territory. But the payoff is real, material advantage, and the psychological impact of capturing a rook. From white's standpoint, the price is severe. But remember, chess is not only material, activity, coordination, and pawn structure will decide if the material is decisive. White plays before, kicking the knight and trying to gain space on the queen side. It is also an attempt to wring activity from the trapped knight or to open lines for counterplay. Black stabilizes with c6. This creates a square for the knight potentially and fortifies the center. It also means black plans to solidify his extra material and remove white active pawn presence. The idea is pragmatic. Consolidate and keep the extra rook. White brings the bishop to e4, centralizing and seeking counterplay by attacking black's structure and threatening pieces. Black places a rook on d8 from a8. The rook now aims to control the open d-file and to line up with somewhat precarious pieces of white. Black is finishing development and connecting the rooks. White plays r6, an audacious rook lift and penetration. The idea is to create threats, perhaps to trade and to attack the king, or to remove defenders and free the e-pawn. This is active, ambitious play. Black answers by capturing that rook. Rxt6 simplifies and accepts the trade, giving up rook for rook but leaving material structures in place. The pawn leaps to d6 by recapturing, becoming a passed pawn in enemy territory. It is a thorn advanced close to promotion squares conceptually, and it ties down black's pieces. White now has a pawn deep in black's camp that might become an asset if it can be supported. Black moves a rook to d8, perhaps to contest the file and keep an eye on d6. Black is tidying up, preserving the material advantage and preparing to eliminate white advanced pawn if possible. White plays bb2, repositioning a bishop to defend and maybe to support the pawn on d6. The bishop eyes the long diagonal and keeps the position connected. The black knight from a1 now heads to b3, close to the heart of white position. It may loom towards c1, t2, and is a disruptive presence aiming to sabotage white coordination and to target key pawns. The a pawn takes on b3, opening the a file and seeking to remove that irritating knight. After the capture, white has removed an invading piece but opened lines for black's rook and bishop. The black rook takes the advanced pawn on d6, eliminating deep passer of white. This simplifies the position further and helps black to convert material advantage. The sequence shows trade-offs. White fought for activity, black for material solidity. White plays ba3, developing a bishop to an active diagonal, perhaps trying to trade bishops or to create counterplay against black's king and queen side. It is a small, patient move, bring more forces to life. Black plays r4, placing his rook on the 4th rank. This is active. The rook can now penetrate, perhaps attack pawns and coordinate with other pieces. Black's pieces are starting to find target squares with purpose. An alternative might have been to prepare doubling rooks or to play b6 to challenge the open files, but rd4 is concrete and aims to exploit white weaknesses immediately. White moves the king to f2. It looks odd, but it is practical. The king steps away from possible checks and prepares to centralize in the end game. In chaotic positions, small king moves can reduce tactical vulnerabilities. Black replies with rook to d2. Giving a check, the rook invades with tempo. Such checks can be deadly because they force the opposing king into awkward squares and win time to improve other pieces. Black prefers activity to waiting. White continues running the king towards safety and perhaps toward the center. In many tactical endgames, the king is a fighting piece. White must be careful though. Moving the king too far from the pawn structure can be risky. Black plays bd3, centralizing the bishop and coordinating with the rook. The bishop lands on a strong diagonal, perhaps aiming to control crucial light squares and to support future encroachment. White plays bf3, consolidating and trying to trade oligarchy squares. White pieces are trying to restrain black's activity and to create a position where material advantage will be less decisive. Black plays bc2, a powerful repositioning. The bishop now occupies a diagonal that hits sensitive points in white camp. It may also prepare to support a pawn advance or to lock down key squares. White retreats the bishop to c1. Perhaps white aims to exchange or to shield the position. It is a patient move. Sometimes the best way to parry is to regroup. Black plays rd3, placing the rook on an invasion square that menaces pawns and can support the bishop. The rook is mobile and well placed to help in the endgame or the decisive tactical shots. White develops the knight to e2, aiming to block lines and to activate the piece. This is development with a defensive flavor, closing tactical seams that previously existed. The black's bishop takes a pawn and opens lines further and continues to collect material and to simplify favorable to the side with the surplus. Notice the pattern. Black has converted early activity into a lasting advantage by steady piece play. White again pulls the king back to f2, perhaps seeking shelter and trying to keep pieces coordinated. The repeated king moves show the difficulty white faces. Defensive chores occupy important tempi. Black plays bd5, centralizing and reinforcing dark square control. The bishop now exerts pressure and keeps white forces tied down. Every move by black reduces white's options and makes the final transformation, converting the advantage more inevitable. White trades on d5, simplifying. This is logical. When you are down material, your trading pieces can sometimes reduce the likelihood of being checkmated or suffering more tactical blows. White hopes the resulting position offers practical chances. Black recaptures with the c-pawn, cx-d5, which also opens lines and consolidates pawn structure in the center. Black's pawn now occupies d5 and helps to restrict white while freeing black's pieces for final operations. White plays be3, centralizing a bishop, perhaps to limit the enemy rook and two key squares. White is trying to develop counterplay despite material deficit. Black responds with rb3, swinging the rook to the 3rd rank. The rook becomes a raider, looking for loose pawns and swallowed squares. Black's plan is clear. Use the rook to pick off material and use pawn majorities to advance. White captures by playing bxa7, seeking to grab whatever material is available. When down material, tactical grabs are natural and sometimes the only way to complicate matters. Black replies with rxb4, The rook snatches another pawn. With these captures, black steadily turns advantages into a winning endgame scenario. White plays bd4, centralizing and attempting to harass black's rook or to create counterplay. This move aims to improve piece coordination. Black pushes b5, expanding on the queen side and restricting the bishop, which also prepare for later breakthroughs. Black is building a fortress around his goals. White moves the king toward the center, perhaps seeking activity. It is a natural attempt to rescue the position. Black responds with rb3, giving check. The rook continues to annoy the white king and to maintain tempo. H-tempo forces white to respond with less ambitious moves. White retreats to d2, looking for safety and trying to keep contact with his pieces. The king is tucked but still in a precarious spot. Black plays h3, moving the rook to the third rank on the king side. Now we see a shift. Black will use the rook actively to attack on the other flank. This rook move signals the beginning of a coordinated king-side assault together with pawn advances. White plays nc3, an attempt to blockade and to bring a last defender into the fray. This is typical of defensive play. You try to consolidate and create a secure formation. Black moves rook to h2, capturing a pawn and delivering a check. The sacrifice of tempo and pawns to open lines is classic. By capturing on h2, black increases pressure on exposed king of brown. The rook jumps into white territory with purpose. White side steps with the king to c1. The king is forced to play cat and mouse as black's pieces circle. Asses plays rh4. You're maintaining rook activity and perhaps threatening to combine with pawns or the other rook to create decisive entry points. Brown strikes with nxt5, capturing on d5 and attempting to blunt black's central pawns. This is a last-ditch effort to reduce the material gap or to clear a path for the king. The knight move is tactical and tries to free up space. Black answers rxg4, capturing another pawn and converting every small advantage into a more decisive reality. The rook becomes the primary instrument of attack, and the h-pawn will soon be rolling forward like a small cannon. White pulls the king back to d2. The repeated shuttling shows the defensive posture. Black plays h5, beginning a pawn storm. This is simple and powerful. The h-pawn will run, create mating nets, or promote. Black's plan now is clean. Advance the king's side pawns and let the rook support. White moves the king to e2, trying to keep lines closed and to escape checks. Black advances h4, tightening the noose. The pawn is supported by the rook and will soon be threatening to break into white position in a decisive way. White moves kf1. The king shuffles to try to avoid mating motifs. Black plays h3, a clinical, penetrating move. The pawn on h3 creates immediate threats. If the pawn becomes untouchable or combined with rook support, white will be overwhelmed. At this point, the anatomy of the win is visible. Black's superior material and a passed king's side pawn make resistance futile. White plays bg1, trying to block the pawn and create a final shield. Black plays b4, the final mechanical blow. With this move, black either creates an unstoppable pawn or secures decisive entry, and white decides the position is hopeless and resigns. What makes this game one of the greatest in chess history isn't just the accuracy of moves, it's the spirit behind them. Acers didn't play to survive, he played to express. He invited risk to the table, stared into the storm, and emerged not with a safe win, but with a masterpiece that generations would study and feel. Browne deserves reverence because it takes a fearless heart to face brilliance head-on. Every counter, every idea he conjured was like light pushing back the dark. In the end, this wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about creation, to mind sculpting eternity out of 64 squares. This game is a masterclass. Every move has a purpose. Every piece works together. For beginners, it's a perfect example of central control, piece activity, sacrifice timing, and strategic follow-through. Study it slowly. Replay positions. Ask yourself, what would I do here? Why did Acers choose this instead? That's how you learn. Thanks for watching. Hope this narrative helps bring the beauty of chess to life. If you found this breakdown insightful, please like the video, share it with fellow chess lovers, and subscribe to the channel.